Good evening. Welcome to the July 16th, 2018 meeting of the Shawnee Planning Commission. We'll start with roll call. Commissioner Montgomery.
Here.
Commissioner Roth. Commissioner Peterson. Commissioner Willoughby.
Here.
Commissioner Beanhoff is absent. Commissioner Busby is here. Commissioner Wise.
Here.
Commissioner Braley.
Here.
Commissioner Les Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Mudgett is absent. Commissioner John Smith.
Here.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States Republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The consent agenda. Items 1 through 4 are listed under the consent items agenda. Unless there's a request to remove one of the items from the consent agenda, the items will be approved in one motion. Is there a request to remove any items from the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Commissioner John Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of items 1 through 4 of the consent agenda.
Subject to staff recommendations.
In the minutes.
Subject to staff recommendations. Is there a second? Commissioner Montgomery.
Second.
Motion is second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. New business, SUP 11-1808, special use permit approval for a commercial child care center at 12310 West 62nd Terrace. Application is filed by Steve Fisher on behalf of Stepping Stones Real Estate LLC. Doug?
Good evening, Doug Allman, planning staff. The applicant requests a special use permit to allow operation of a child care facility with up to 100 children at 12310 West 62nd Street, Terrace. The property is zoned commercial highway. Child care centers are allowed in the CH zoning district with approval of the special use permit. The proposed location was previously used as an office building for TED Systems and has been vacant for some time. The child care facility will be open from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and will provide full-time child care for children ages 6 weeks to 6 years old. The facility will operate Monday through Friday and will be closed on weekends. In addition to standard child care services, the facility will provide STEM programs for science, technology, engineering, and math, as well as French and Spanish language programs. The property is located on the north side of 62nd Terrace east of Long Avenue. Properties to the north are zoned R1 single-family residential, while properties to the west, east, and south are zoned CH. Property to the west is developed with office uses, and the Westlake Hardware Garden Center is located to the east. Property to the south across 62nd Terrace contains parking and open space for the KCAS Bioanalytical Services Building. Property to the north is developed with 2 legal non-conforming duplex homes in the Canaan Court subdivision. A 6-foot-tall privacy fence and tree line separates the property from the residential lots to the south. The owner is in the process of making application for their child care license with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. The license will not be issued by the state until completion and inspection of the finished tenant space. To comply with state requirements, the applicant has submitted a drawing that indicates a 6-foot privacy fence will be constructed to enclose a 3,945 square foot area adjacent to the north and west of the building. This area will be used as the required outdoor playground. The character of the area will not be changed significantly by use of the property as a child care facility. The facility is surrounded by other retail and office uses to the south, east, and west. Because the facility is in a standalone building, the existing driveway approach and parking lot are set up for convenient drop-off and pickup of children at the front of the building. Approval of the special use permit should have little, if any, detrimental effect upon surrounding properties. The outdoor play area is fenced, and the area is further buffered from residents to the north by a mature tree line. The nearest duplex is located more than 50 feet away from the existing privacy fence. Staff recommends approval of SUP 11-18-08, special use permit for Stepping Stones Montessori Learning Center, a child care facility to be located at 12310 West 62nd Terrace, subject to the following conditions. 1, the child care facility will operate from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. The number of children present at the center shall not exceed 100 at any one time. If the permanent license issued by the state reflects a lesser number, then the maximum capacity shall be lowered by the number allowed by the KDHE. 2, the owner shall obtain and maintain a valid business license from the city clerk's office while the facility is in operation. 3, wall signage is only allowed on the south and west building elevations. Wall signage may not project above the primary roof line. Any signage installed shall meet requirements of FCMC 5.64, and a sign permit shall be obtained from the planning department prior to installation of signage on the building. 4, the applicant shall obtain a building permit for all tenant modifications that would be necessary to operate a child care facility in the building. 5, the owner shall obtain all required state licenses and fire inspections prior to issuance of a business license. All fire safety improvements required by the Shawnee Fire Department shall be completed prior to issuance of a business license or opening of the facility to the public. A copy of the permanent state license and subsequent annual fire inspection report shall be submitted to the planning department once they are obtained. And 6, review of the new special use permit in 1 year.
Thank you, Doug. Is the applicant present?
Yes, we are.
Would you come forward and state your name and address, please?
Steve Fisher.
If you do it over at the microphone over here.
I can do that.
Steve Fisher. My current address is 9020 West 77th Street in Overland Park.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Are you in agreement with staff recommendations?
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much. Does the commission have any questions for staff or applicant? If not, thank you, sir. We would be in a public hearing now. Does anybody from the public wish to speak on this matter? If not, we'll end the public hearing and go into commission discussion. For lack of discussion, would someone care to present a motion? Commissioner Peterson. Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Braley.
Yes, I'd like to second that motion.
There's a motion and a second to approve SUP 111808, special use permit for approval of a commercial child care center at 12310 West 62nd Terrace. Application filed by Steve Fisher on behalf of Stepping Stones Real Estate. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Fisher, and welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next on the agenda is SUP 121808, special use permit approval for operation of a group daycare with up to 12 children as a home occupation located at 12214 West 72nd Street. Application is filed by Sandra Burks Jarrett, owner. Doug?
Doug Allman, planning staff. The applicant requests special use permit approval for operation of a group daycare home with up to 12 children as a home occupation at 12214 West 72nd Street. The owner has operated a legal daycare at the home for 6 children or less for approximately 10 years. Her state-issued license allows her to care for up to 12 children. The property is zoned PD and is located within the Grand Duke subdivision. The property contains a single-family residence. Surrounding properties in all directions are also zoned PD and are developed with other single-family homes. The applicant is requesting approval to operate a daycare with up to 12 children in their home. The hours of operation will be 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. Unless all children are under care or above the age of 5, the applicant shall have a minimum of 2 adult caregivers at the site anytime there are more than 10 children present at the home. As allowed by SMC 17.66, the daycare may employ up to the equivalent of 1 full-time non-resident employee, up to 40 hours per week combined if more than 1 employee will work in the home. The applicant has indicated that her daughter, who also lives in the home, will assist in caring for the children who utilize the daycare. The property is served by a two-car driveway that has approximately 45 feet of depth. This provides room for off-street drop-off and pickup of children. In accordance with the city's requirement, the applicant has a fenced play area in the backyard. The backyard is surrounded with a 5-foot-tall chain-link fence on all 3 sides. The fire department completed an on-site inspection of the residence on July 2nd, 2018, as required. The site inspection indicated that all life safety requirements were satisfied. Granting of the special use permit should have little, if any, detrimental effect on surrounding properties. There are numerous special use permits that have been issued for the provision of childcare as a home occupation without concerns being raised. And this owner has operated a daycare at the residence for several years with no issues or problems. In terms of recommendation, staff recommends approval of SUP 12-18-08 for Little Hands Daycare for the operation of a group daycare with up to 12 children as a home occupation located at 12214 West 72nd Street, subject to the following conditions. 1, review of the special use permit in 1 year. 2, the applicant shall comply with all requirements of the Kansas Department of Health and Environment and maintain an annually renewed daycare license from the state. A copy of the license shall be provided to the Community Development Department after it is renewed by KDHE. 3, the applicant shall have no more than 12 children at the home, including the provider's own, between the hours of 7 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. 4, unless all children under care are above the age of 5, the applicant shall have a minimum of 2 adult caregivers on site at any time there are more than 10 children present at the home as required by the state. 5, the applicant may have a non-resident employee or employee who works at the home. The employee or employee's work cannot total more than 40 hours in combination as allowed by SMC 17.66. 6, the applicant shall obtain an annual business license from the city clerk every year the daycare remains in operation. And 7, no signage either on-site or off-site is allowed. And that completes our report.
Thank you, Doug. Is the applicant present? If you'd come forward and state your name and address, please.
My name is Sandra Burks Jarrett. My address is 12214 West 72nd Street, Shawnee, Kansas, 66216.
Thank you, Sandra. Are you in agreement with staff recommendations?
Yes.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions for applicant or staff? Commissioner Peterson?
My name is, first of all, I know that picked up Wayner House for up to 6 kids. Yours is a significant.
$20.
Any other questions for applicant or staff? If not, then as this is a public hearing, does anybody from the public wish to comment on this? As there's no one coming forward, then the public hearing would be finished and we're in commission discussion. Since we've had a very short discussion, would someone care to make a motion? Commissioner Wise?
I'll make a motion to approve SUP 12-18-08 special use permit for Little Hands Home Daycare located at 12214 West 72nd Street. First to ask the recommendations.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Montgomery?
Second motion.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second to approve SUP 121808 special use permit approval for operation of a group daycare with up to 12 children as a home occupation located at 12214 West 72nd Street. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Sandra, welcome to the community.
Thank
Although
you.
you already still live here, but congratulations on adding to your venture.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is consider consideration of amending the home occupation section of the zoning regulations. Paul?
At the July 2nd, 2018 Planning Commission meeting, commissioners considered amending the zoning regulations to list photography studios in section 17.66.020 of the zoning regulations as a specifically permitted home occupation. After some discussion regarding the number of persons who may be at a home for a photo session and the method of developing photos, the commission authorized staff to publish a notice of public hearing for this meeting. As with all amendments to the zoning regulations, the Planning Commission is required to hold a public hearing on the proposed text amendment and make a recommendation to the governing body. A copy of 17.66 of the zoning regulations is attached indicating the proposed amendment. Upon completion of the public hearing, the Planning Commission shall consider amending the home occupation section of the zoning regulations. Staff is supportive of the request. That concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Does the commission have any questions for staff on this matter? If not, then we're opening a public hearing. Anyone wishing to comment on this should come forward now. Seeing no one has moved at all, we would now close the public hearing and be in commission discussion. Commissioner Braley.
Yeah, I am certainly in favor of this being added as a home occupation and being recognized by the city, and I think it's a good one to add to the list.
Okay, then would you mind making a recommendation we can vote on to pass it on to city council?
Absolutely. I'd like to
Please,
make a
thank you.
recommendation that
Thank
we.
you, Commissioner Braley.
You're welcome. I would like, is it a formal motion or just?
Just a recommendation?
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that the addition of photography studio be added to the, what are we adding it to? Home occupation section of
17.66.
17 point, where are we at? 17.66.010.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Montgomery,
I'll second the motion.
there's a motion and a second to recommend to the city council approval and of adding photography onto home occupations as stated by the original motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. One correction I need to make, as I don't normally carry a calendar, we're at the August meeting, not the July meeting. My mistake. I hope it's all clarified.
We all knew we were here.
Lauren, we're now considering proposed design guidelines for the South Neiman Road Zone. Lauren?
Yes. Thank you guys for having me. I'm Lauren Grasshoff, neighborhood planner and staff liaison for the Shawnee Downtown Partnership. If most of you are probably aware that we have design guidelines that were established in 2002 for what we call pedestrian zone here in downtown Shawnee. That's essentially from Flint along Johnson Drive over to east to Blue Jacket, and then it goes north up to 65th and then south to about 60th Street. Since those were created, it has been a goal for the city to create guidelines for additional commercial areas in downtown Shawnee, particularly what we call the South Neiman Road Zone, and that is basically within a block east and west from Neiman on 60th down to Shawnee Mission Parkway. With all of the Neiman Now improvements and other development that's happening, the Shawnee Downtown Partnership saw this as a good time to work on those design guidelines this year. They've been working on those for the past 6 months. And they sort of started out with a goal, what they wanted the guidelines to be, what they didn't, and then they were provided input for key concepts for the guidelines. They discussed, again, what they wanted, what they liked, Then also just generally what the architectural landscape of the character of the corridor should be. The primary goal for the guidelines is to be flexible, preserve existing character and history of Shawnee, and allow for design innovation. So not necessarily cookie cutter or repetitive design, so it definitely allows flexibility again, and that's one of their primary goals. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the new design guidelines. A lot of the concepts and actual key components are carried forward from the pedestrian zone guidelines. That includes having new construction built at the property line, so in most cases right on Neiman Road, parking being placed behind the buildings, multimodal accommodations, pedestrian scale storefronts, use of quality materials, and general compatibility with the existing buildings. Some of the topics that are covered, I'll just go through real quick, do include site design. So again, building orientation, setbacks, so allowing some setbacks for maybe residential or outdoor restaurant, eating areas, parking to the rear, site access, landscaping, outdoor amenities, and screening. That also looks at transitions between uses, form, and scale. Building design, so calling for four-sided design, creating visual interest by varying materials, features, proportions, and other building enhancements. First-story building components include emphasizing primarily that pedestrian, that human scale. And then upper story, looking at how to break up large facades. So if we start adding more density, we want to make sure that we just don't have a line of boxes along Neiman Road. Roof form, looking at compatibility to what's adjacent, and then also providing clear definition. And this also with some of the amenity and the pedestrian uses that we're adding, we also want to encourage rooftop amenities, building materials that are quality and have durability. Looks at lighting, so lighting as building accents, not sort of a secondary thought there. And then alleys, courtyards, rear entrances, and pedestrian corridors. So basically opportunities to utilize all those spaces, and then also how to make those safe. Lastly is accessibility, which is required. As noted in your packet memo, the guidelines are recommendations to ensure thoughtful and creative design. They allow discretionary interpretation and decision-making by the Planning Commission. So that would be through site plan review for significant renovation of exterior buildings that are existing, as well as new construction within the corridor. At the June 28th Shawnee Downtown Partnership meeting, they did recommend approval by the Planning Commission.
Does the commission have any questions for Lauren? Commissioner John Smith.
Well, I think it's commendable that these guidelines are being updated and that you have them in the first place. I'm wondering though, is this unique to this section, or are there other areas of the city where there's similar guidelines? I don't know if staff or you or...
So we have, these are similar, like I said, along Johnson Drive. We do have some other areas where we looked at, like I-435 corridor, but these go into more detail than our sort of standard design guidelines within our zoning code.
Okay, thank you.
And that's within this particular zoning code, which is the Neiman Road project. Is that correct?
Yes,
So we have special things we've done on or allowing them to do in the Neiman Road area.
correct.
Okay?
Yes.
There's why I have a couple questions. Several years ago, we determined that with our standing parking spaces, if they added more green area, then we would allow them to go under the amount of parking spaces necessary. Will that apply here?
Well, I
Parking code in downtown is very liberal. We allow public parking spaces to count towards required parking. It essentially, we look at them on a case-by-case basis to make sure that there's enough parking in and around the area to serve the use. So when you're talking about the parking maxims that we did quite some time ago, the downtown area is a little bit different animal than a standard project review.
And it is actually referenced in 3.3 under the site design section. Under parking, it does say that basically it references the zoning code section that's specific to parking. And then it does, one of the goals there is to not rely on those standard parking minimums that we see a lot.
And that's interesting because if I look at a couple areas, and this is my own bugaboo, I know it's not going to change anything, but when I go to Westport and there's a lack of parking, and now when I go to Overland Park, which they're very proud of and it's amazing, parking there is atrocious. And I'm really concerned that we will get into the same dilemma that as we add, because in all likelihood, we will have apartments there of some sort. And with the way we're doing the parking, that if we reduce the amount of parking spaces compared to where we do in other areas, that we may end up with let's park on the city street let's park on the side street up the street and create our own set of issues that way. So that's just my opinion. I know that's not going to change anything. But I do have another question. Several months ago, 6 months ago or so, we had a joint meeting with the city council. And in that, you brought up the idea of these see-through signs and that the police did not like them, which is the signs that are Budweiser or the Chief Stadium or whatever on that. Is this an area where, because this is a specialized area, that we might be able to say we will not allow those signs in there?
That is something that we could adopt or change within our sign code, yes.
I find those sounds to be absolutely gorgeous, but really kind of just like, really? I mean, the police don't like them because they can't see in. And I'm not sure it does a great favor to others that they can't see in. And I think when it was brought up for the whole city, it seemed to me that the horse was out of the cart, or the horse was out of the barn at that point in time. But since we have a specialized area here, it seems to me that that might be appropriate to say we don't want those kind of signs in the windows in this specialized area.
And Chappie Plain Director, if site plans come through, you can have that as a stipulation.
Can we do it for the whole area? If we did it for the whole area, would there not be no longer be a question about it?
We could regulate it by zoning district.
Sign code, you probably could, or, in some cases, may be appropriate on some building and not on others, too.
So that's something you feel like will be better dealt with on individual buildings?
I would say it's an aesthetic control on a case-by-case basis, just like we'll look at parking on a case-by-case basis to make sure we're not creating a problem. Because there may be some, I can't think of it, maybe some wonderful stencil that is actually an art piece that we would possibly want to allow that wasn't an advertisement. Some of the new buildings have some cool things, and the architecture down here is going to be different than probably what we've seen, so.
So sign code is where it fits in, so we have to figure out whether it's aesthetic or whether it's in advertising, and so,
Yeah. But
okay,
we can get detailed information.
okay. Can that be a part of determining that we must determine whether they can put those type of signs in the windows? Because I'd imagine at my advanced age, I will not always remember things like that.
Yes.
One more question. Since we're allowing these buildings to be built in a downtown area, similar to if I look across the street, we're talking about alleyways there. Is there a designation or a feeling for how many buildings can be with no gap between them or no alleyway? Or is that something we just get to? I mean, if we're wanting everybody to park behind, then it would seem to me that at some point in time, we would not want a full city block to where to get to the center, you'd have to walk clear around the whole building.
Sure.
Is there
and these don't get that specific, so that's certainly something that would be addressed at site development.
Very fine, thank you. Commissioner Braley?
Yeah, as a follow-up to your comment regarding parking, I wondered if just in a very high-level sort of analysis, is there enough property there to support parking for the density that we think we are going to want to attract?
I am not a developer, so I don't know that I can specifically.
Possibly going to see parking in different ways than you have before. We always have this mind of surface parking. There may be some subgrade parking, there may be structured parking in combinations with some of these buildings. Because the development community will want to make sure that their investment can be parked. And so we may be building up rather than out, I guess is the way to put it. So we will be looking at that on every project that comes in before you for site plan approval, doing an analysis. It might be something kind of like what we did on Belmont Promenade, where we looked at the number of one-bedroom units versus two-bedroom units and three-bedroom units, and maybe one space per dwelling unit makes sense because of that ratio. But I think that surface parking will be just part of the solution here. I have a feeling
Okay.
that there will be some structured parking.
And that's where I'm kind of leaning on staff and those that know the area as we've been developing, and know soil conditions and things like that is it possible to go down, or is it slab limestone 4 feet underground, and that's not an option, and then it's an expensive underground garage, and then we're looking at adding stories, and then if it goes to, so then what's that limit and tolerance for adjacencies? And that fine line that we seem to have to negotiate, and everybody's negotiating now, because that's what's going right now, is going up, getting that density, but it's a close adjacency to single-family residential. So, so again, I think it's just reinforcing parking is certainly on the mind for me as well. And then again, as a follow-up on your signage, window signage, I think where my point of view on that is really, again, sort of taking it building by building, but understanding that, for an example, if what we have in the city now is if you have one storefront and 100% of the windows are covered up, I kind of have a problem with that. But if it's a type of development where you've got three sides and they're proposing that only maybe 20% of their window is going to have that kind of graphic on it, so that then the officers have a sight line into the space, then I might not have as much of a problem to it. So that's kind of where I land on the window signage. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Peterson?
This is touching all three of those, but one of the things that I would like to ask for you guys is, okay, because sometimes we are presented with a situation where, say, a tenant comes into a strip mall type of situation, and it was like, well, they need this many parking spaces, but they're doing a shared parking with whatever. If you could remind us that, okay, it's not just that one that's using that shared parking, that we've had 3 requests for that shared parking, so that we understand the big picture, because sometimes I think we get limited to the problem in front of us instead of seeing the big picture. And I'm not as old as our esteemed leader, but I forget too. So the point is, as well as just to have continuity over, I mean, commissions change as well. And if you could say, we don't have 6 requests for the same slice of pie, so to speak. If you could help us in keeping that bigger picture available, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Even though I've been through this, I'll note under site design 3.3, there is a misspelling before. It's the second sentence before parking. You probably don't want to have what's in there. So you want it to be shared parking. Minor point.
I didn't know there was
3.3?
shared parking, so I was confused by that.
That could be awkward.
Oh, okay. Got that.
But, and I would just like to say I appreciate staff's, thoroughness in developing this. I think it's a good set of guidelines. I mean, there's definitely some questions, but it, tries to provide a balance without going too far and dictating too much. And I know that can be a tricky balance. So I just appreciate the effort, and hopefully this, we get some good development, some good ideas out of this.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for staff? If not, then I think at this point in time, somebody should make a motion to recommend approving the recommendations. Commissioner Willoughby.
I move for approval of the proposed design guidelines for the South Neiman Road Zone as presented.
Is there a second? Commissioner Les Smith.
Second.
Motion is second to approve the guidelines as presented from the Shawnee Downtown Partnership and staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Does staff have any other business for us wonderful, highly paid commissioners?
We generally earn all of our pay.
So I have a couple items for commission and staff. And one of them, and somebody, if you like this idea, I'll tell you who it was. If not, it was my idea. But we're having a discussion and talking about the fact when we make a motion and then a second, that we should have discussion after that. And I think 2 weeks ago, that might have helped clarify what we were trying to do, because we have a motion in front of us and a second. And then at that point in time, we've almost acted as if, well, that's the end of the discussion. And somebody pointed out to me that realistically, we don't have a discussion, a meaningful discussion, until we have a motion and a second. So I think the one thing I'm going to need to change to do, and that we're going to have to realize, is once there's a motion, then we should have another discussion, so that if we need to add or change or clarify, a motion and a second, because a motion is not a motion until there's a second. So it would seem to me that that's something I should begin to do, and hopefully you guys will help me with it, unless somebody has any other comments or
Mr.
questions on
Chairman,
that.
I don't
Commissioner
know
Les Smith.
who that brilliant individual was, but,
It was Commissioner Les Smith.
oh, I didn't remember that. No, the point being, and you're right, I mean, I think the point being, especially when we had Belmont in front of us, was, you get into technicalities that, technically you don't even have your item on the table until you have a motion, whatever it might be, but the lame analogy that I would use is that we can all sit up here and nod our heads, yes, that we agree that something should be blue, but then somebody makes a motion for light blue, and at that point in time, we can't discuss it, clarify it, we either vote yes or no. And the real order of business that we're going to vote on is the actual motion. And I agree, that would give us an opportunity to discuss that, amend it if we wish. I think it'd make things run a lot smoother up here as well. Sometimes we make comments about things and it's kind of almost generic in nature, whereas if we're discussing the actual motion, we can be very specific with our intentions. So I would support your suggestion.
And one other thing I'll add is, if I'm thinking right on this, if we have a motion and a second, we have a discussion, we wish to change it, at that point in time, we would have to ask the person that made the second if he'd withdraw it, and then ask the person that made the motion if that person would wish to withdraw it or amend his motion. Is that correct? That we'd have to withdraw the second and then come back to it? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Robert's Rules of Orders, I've never read. So I'm lamping through this, Stephen.
I'll tell you that.
That's the way the council does it.
No.
But I think that would make sense, that whoever makes that motion withdraws or amends.
Yeah, could change it with the agreement of the second, or another commissioner could make a motion to amend it. You then vote on that amendment to the motion, then you vote on the actual motion itself. So we can work our way through that, I think, pretty easily.
Anybody else have any comments on this? Commissioner Peterson.
I would agree with my esteemed colleagues for several reasons. First of all, as badly as I floundered through making a motion last time. But the other thing too is sometimes we vote to not approve something because we don't feel, and having the ability to clarify that after we actually have the motion in front of us, I think would be very beneficial.
Terrific. I don't know how long we've been doing it the way I've been doing it, and I may have changed it somewhere along the line, but unless anybody has an objection, then that's what we'll begin to do.
Good night.
Commissioner Brayley.
Thank you. I'm trying to process a little bit, and I certainly don't want to make any more complicated for us if we have to go back and withdraw a second and either amend or propose a new motion. Could it not be in our discussion if somebody is already intending or formulating a motion to suggest or volunteer that I'm going to be making a motion that goes something like this, to then stimulate that conversation rather than go through the steps of a motion, a second, and then discussion, and then back to a motion and a second, and then. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure it does, because if I'm intending to make a motion, does not mean I made a motion. Okay, so to me, it takes a motion and a second, and the other part is good dialogue. But until we have a motion, and a second, we don't know what we're voting on anyway.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We'll still have a dialogue. It will initiate, the intent of what I'm hearing is to initiate a dialogue on specifics, right?
Correct.
So if I'm intending to make the motion in the discussion, as we have our discussion, and we get down to the end of it, I would hope if we all kind of got into this, somebody would step forward as they would wanting to make a motion. I'm ready that I'm going to make this following motion to continue that discussion, get the specifics out there, because it just, as I'm processing, it seems like it could get a little clunky at times to say, I made a motion, we got a second, we're going to have a discussion, withdraw the second, make another motion. You know what I'm saying?
Make another motion or amend a motion.
Right.
Right.
That's my.
We can.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, my experience is that, this is not going to happen very often. We might be overthinking it just a tad. I think we pretty much are all really good at trying to get consensus, or at least a feeling of what the consensus is on something before we make a motion. I just really don't see it happening that often. But, from a technical standpoint, we really don't have anything to discuss until we have a motion and a second, which actually puts the item on the table, to be technical about it. I think we'll be good, and if not, then we can tweak it as we go along.
Commissioner,
okay, it's just my suggestion.
Commissioner Willoughby.
I agree with Les. And I've seen it at the council meetings, that it happens only occasionally, but that's the way they treat it. They just back off of the second, amend the motion, and then go on.
Yeah. Okay.
But it doesn't happen very often, so I don't think it's a big problem.
Commissioner Montgomery.
I support the suggestion. I actually think by Robert's Rules of Order, you're supposed to have discussion before you, after the motion and before the vote. And I often feel like it's rushed, and there's something I wanted to ask or a comment I wanted to make, and my time's up because we're already moving on to the vote. So I'm glad we're moving that direction. I think it's the right way to do it.
Commissioner John Smith.
I think it's appropriate as chairman, and once there's a motion and a second made, you can ask if there's additional discussion and we'll go forward.
Since this is a change, I will only ask that the other commissioners assist me with that. If I get to going and forget, just interrupt me. And that's all we need to talk about on that point. Commissioner Willoughby, yes.
I move for adjournment.
Well, I got one more thing I want to talk about.
Next meeting.
In our commission discussion, sometimes, and I think we're all guilty of it, is saying, well, I'd like to ask staff this question. I really think in commission discussion, if another commissioner cannot answer the question, then I don't have a problem with calling on staff or applicant. But we should really try and answer our own questions when we're in commission discussion. Okay. Mr. Montgomery.
Commission discussion, does that take place? Because I've heard you ask, are there questions for staff or applicant? Are those two different
Correct. As
parts
soon
of the
as-
procedure?
After the staff's presentation, then the applicant has a chance to at least give his name and address and any comments he wants. And then we're able to ask staff or applicant any questions. Then we go into commission discussion, which essentially says we're only discussing amongst ourselves. And I don't have a problem if nobody up here can answer a question with asking staff or applicant to clarify something. That's no big deal, but I think we ought to try. We're experienced enough, and believe me, I have great faith in everybody up here on the decisions they make. I have never had a problem with the way anybody has voted on anything. We have different perspectives and we'll vote different. But I think also we're experienced enough now, we might be able to answer our own questions without involving staff or applicant. If we can't, it's not a big issue to ask so that we have a clarification. And I guess that's what I'm referring to. And other than that, I have nothing else for the commission or staff. He tried once, didn't let him get away with it, so now look what we have to deal with.
I'd like to make a motion
Commissioner Montgomery.
that we adjourn.
A motion for adjournment. Is there a second? Oh, man, now it's getting tough up here. Commissioner Wise,
I'll second the motion.
motion second for adjournment. All in favor?
Do we need a discussion?
Yes, is there any further
Clarification?
discussion? We have a motion and a second. Is there any
Mr.
further discussion?
Peterson, would you like to discuss this matter further?
No, I was just curious if there was K-State football on or something.
On tonight?
Yeah, no, wait, he wants to get out of here.
Okay, so is
No
there any,
discussion.
is there any further discussion?
Awesome.
If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. We're adjourned. Thank
of
you
these
all.
days, everybody.
Thank you all for being here. Yeah, this
I'm gonna raise it.
My problem.
I think we're the reason why Paul was retired.